Uh, Good afternoon. I guess everyone is getting ready for the evening. I guess happy weekend, and it is quite some time that I haven't been able to broadcast, and I'm sure my fan will want to hear from me. And I really appreciate all of you. You know, you guys are so amazing and so wonderful. And my name is Funton Daniel, as you all have heard. And thank you, George Orbit. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Ramol. Thank you, Sue. Willie Morris. If I skip your name, doesn't mean that I intentionally intended to skip your name, but I just appreciate you. Join me in this little broadcast this evening. Thank you. And make sure you don't just join in, you also share as well. And thank you, Tia. Thank you, Tanis. Thank you, Michael, Justice, Loki, Susan, James, Abby, Tang, David Williams, Vivian, Lena, Robert, Kevin, Kepa, Jeff, Ash, Gustav, user number 472, P joined, Bryant. Thank you for hitting that share button. You know, it is quite amazing. I am sure all of you are going to be having a wonderful weekend, and I'm sure you also, if you have an opportunity, just share how you plan to hook up your weekend days. I am sure it's gonna be a fantastic for all of you that are tuning in this broadcast. And it is very, very effective and efficient. There is some point that I wanted to clarify, but that point would be based as this message proceed. And I appreciate all of you for tuning in this afternoon. And it is quite amazing. Um, Let me join from Africa. Oh yeah, sure. Why not invite? Join. Thank you for tuning in, and T user Brian, Evelyn, Yona, Rena, Coco, Bryant, Camel, Teddy. Oh, and appreciate all of you. Visionary Prayer Ministry. Oh, amazing. A Visionary Prayer Ministry. Where are you tuning in from? Anyway, just make sure when you join in, just briefly, I am very systematically going through to see the comment you guys made. So it is fantastic because that empower me, that give me the love you guys have. And I love open criticism, because without open criticisms we can make an effective change. So just tune in and tell me where you are and what you find amazing and what you find correction that need to be done, and that is very important. And I appreciate all of you that are tuning in. Zikini, Brian, Pastime, Miriam, Pedro. Oh my God, that name sounds yep, brilliant. That's amazing. And so, but don't hesitate to hit the share button, and don't hesitate to write comments, and don't hesitate to indicate where you are. And that is very appreciate. And don't hesitate to hit the share button. That's the most powerful things. And when you join in, hit the share button. That's the most very fantastic, because we can make a very fast and rapid number, and it is very crucial, and it is you guys are amazing. You guys are amazing. But however, I appreciate all of you to take your precious moment and just simply to watch. And it is amazing. And so I am overwhelmed with joy. And that is why I appreciate all of you that are tuning in. And but there is one thing that, I know many of you, especially if you're here in the United States, you're here in South America, you're in China, you're in Russia, Europe, South America. I think I mentioned about South America. Anyway, but there is one thing that I am very passionate about it. And that is why I continue bring this attention. Because, there is a crisis. There is a crisis that is rocking Africa. But I know there is crisis everywhere in the world. But this one is more particular attentions to me. And that is why I am bringing, because, excuse me, I am bringing to my audience to understand the impact that affect the society, and I'm gonna give, and I know many of you want to hear things that I want to talk about, especially when it concerned Africa. I know I predicted before, and I see that happening. And I want to take a moment to thank the newly elected Senegalese president, And he's a very young guy, seeing a very young, dynamic guy elected as a president in Africa. It's an unprecedented, because we find people elected that are in the upper 70s, that is in the upper 50s. Then one wondering, hey,
How
hi,
are you?
how are you?
Where are you from, brother?
I am speaking here in the United States.
Oh my God. Nice, nice.
And where are you speaking from?
I am speaking from Pakistan.
Wow, wow. And it should be
Yeah.
nighttime in Pakistan.
Welcome, ji, welcome.
Uh, you know, you know, I talk about political issues, and I'm sure it affects all rest of the world. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and, and you know, I'm talking about
You eating
political
date?
freedom. You know,
You eating date?
I'm sorry.
Date, date.
What is that?
Nice fruit.
Oh, okay,
Yes, yes.
that's good.
Very nice. Taste very sweet.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure it's nighttime in Pakistan.
Ji, ji, yes, yes.
What time is in Pakistan now?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. And what do you call it?
My friend is very funny boy.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I appreciate you for joining, and I
Yes,
appreciate
yes.
you for
Of
joining
course, of
right from
course.
Pakistan.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Um, all right. But the key things of my conversation, the key point I want to talk about is something that I have passion, and I believe that it's gonna bring a resonate. Many of you saw one thing, that there were so many, almost 100 and people
Yes,
capsized
yes.
in Mediterraneans or people trying to cross into Europe, and the vessel
Youth.
capsized and caused a
Yeah.
number of deaths that
Yes.
impact
Yes.
many Africans.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that is why I wanted to appreciate the newly Senegalese elected
Yes.
president.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
You you send me flowers.
okay.
Yeah.
Uh, all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate
Send me.
you
Send
for.
me.
Okay. All right. So I want to drive this point that I want to talk about today. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So, many Africans have had a problems. Many Africans have had a problems with the French government, and especially the 14 African countries, and
तो मेरा
the
पूरा critical
passion
तरीके मुझे मैं
that
नहीं
the
आती थी.
Senegalese is taking is very vital. You know, my point is, why should Africa, its own monetary policy, its own currency, be printed by the French government? And why the French government do not give opportunity for Africans? And so the action taken by the Senegalese president is an unprecedented for Africa cultural dynamic that the rest of African must enumerate. Imagine Africa is very vast dynamically with resources, but yet they are the poorest despite the fact. And so African leaders must consider, African president must consider that investment is a top priority. Let's look at number one on the financial and monetary policy. Financial aspect, the economic policy, money in circulation should be determined by the forces of demand and supply. What did I mean by the forces of demand and supply? It means that the central bank of any regional African countries must play a vital role, and that must be with according with the vision of the president. And that is why you see France supported dictatorship. That's why France supported dictatorship and allowed chronic leaders to remain in power, because to serve the interests of France rather than the interests of Africa as a whole. Let's take, for example, Cameroon. For many of you who don't know who is Cameroon, Cameroon has a president that has been there since President of France, the current President of France, Emmanuel Macron, was 2 years old. If Emmanuel Macron was 2 years old and he is now the French president, can you imagine when that president was being in power? That was since 1982. And yet, does it imply that there is nobody in Cameroon that can be able to govern that country? He has outlived his own age and now control the younger generation and deprive the younger generation of their own vision. Remember that Paul Biya was the president on his own generation with this specific time frame. And now he wants to rule Cameroon in a different generation, in a different time space. And yet, the fact is clear that he himself is not fully aware. Hello? How are you?
I am fine.
And where are you calling from? I'm sorry for the interruptions. People just want to be on the media, but they don't have point to advance. So the key point that I emphasize is that Africa need to change, the culture. Let's take, for example, with the monetary policy, which I initially, sorry for the interruptions, there should be a central bank involvement in any African policy. There should be central bank involvement. And how does the central bank involvement? Is when we have a central bank with a stable monetary policy that focus on the development of Africa. Let's take, for example, there's one thing that I usually describe like the IMF, International Monetary Fund. I call it personally international monetary fraud because the interest of Africa is never a prime priority of IMF. The International Monetary Fund does not serve the interest of Africa. The primary reason of the bank is to exploit. And why should solely the president should be appointed only by France? And it's the governing body you expect that you work on the interest of the entire world community. But specifically appointment with the IMF comes from France. And do you expect, let me give you a typical example that you should understand why I am very adamant about the IMF. The IMF does not serve the interests of Africa, especially when it comes to priority project or infrastructural investment. Let's take, for example, if IMF was to provide loan for certain African countries, they gave that loan at a higher interest that would discourage. And that is why Africans are so indebted into chronic debt because of the high interest rate that are given. For example, if a European country applies for a loan, if actually the IMF is functioning to effectively, that loan will be given at a lower interest rate, maybe 0.5, 0.2, or 1%. But when it comes to Africa, they give to Africa at 17, 20, 30% over 30 years period. And that interest at 20% is extracted from Africa at a high interest rate, and that it don't even allow room for investment. Imagine that a loan that was given at the interest of 20% interest rate for a period of 30 years. And that same amount of loan is given to European country at 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 at a low interest rate. Imagine the gap of development. That bank will be able to pay its loan in Europe, whereas the one in Africa will remain indebted. And another thing to understand about France is clear evidence. France takes the loan and pay into, let me give you a tip before I go into that key point. The Senegalese president indicate that business taxes, French company to be more specifically, will be paid in Senegalese treasury. So taxes to the French company will be paid into the Senegalese treasury. That indicates that there is a dynamic change of culture. There is a dynamic change of policy. And you could imagine, has African company pay taxes? African companies working in France pay their taxes into African treasury? Of course, into the 14 African countries treasury? Of course not. They pay into France. But meanwhile, African countries pay their taxes instead of African treasury, they pay into French treasury. And when Africans borrow money, French government asked that money to be paid into caisse communautaire français. They asked the money to be paid into caisse communautaire français. That money, that's supposed to be African money, but I pay into French treasury. And French treasury take the same money and borrow back into a higher interest rate. So there is a double jeopardy that is going on here, that France is being manipulating Africa for its own goal and its own objective. So arise, Africa. And this is why France controls every aspect. There is one question I posted on my Facebook. I said, when the Chadian president was overthrown through military coup d'etat, of course, you will understand who actually organized the coup d'etat. Emmanuel Macron is the first French president to preside over the installation, whereas the Senegalese president, French never stepped there to do the installations. And that is why I show you the miraculous change of vision of Africa. Africa needs to arise and change this cultural dynamic for the interests of Africans. So what are the three factors African leaders or presidents must enumerate? One, establish a technological research that focus on industrial development for the 21st century of Africa. They need to provide financial assistance, subvention for those who have economic viability plan. And they need to make those money available. And they have to have a transparent justice system. Not a justice system that is full of corrupted officials. There should be an accountability for every individual that have an authority in any government institution. So these vital factors must be put in place for the African economic viability. It is very, very crucial that for Africa, with the vast land, vast mineral, must have an educational system in place that are able to meet the growth of African development. And let's take, for example, this other African country. They just instituted their money is backed by gold. And that is a fundamental value that's shown that they are moving in the right direction. But to be able to institute those, there must be a system where the justice system is viable, that is working for the interest, and that the restructuring of the police system that has become a chronic corrupted system. They must revive the police system that meet the dispensation of the changing demographic of culture of Africa. And they must embrace African in the diaspora to work in good collaborations. Because imagine, look, African in the diaspora, the essence is not to destabilize, but the essence to inject the knowledge for the growth of African development. And so therefore, they shouldn't be regarded as an endangered species. African in the diaspora should not be regarded as an endangered species, but they should look them as part of African growth and development. And they should be tapped. And when Africans are tapped, they must bring the vision that meets the dispensation for the growth. Because when you imagine seeing Africans perish in the Mediterranean Sea to Europe, where they have little or no land at all, so how did they become economic viability? We all study. We all know how they grow. But yet, we are little knowledge what policy we need to institute it to meet this dispensational growth for all Africans. There should be an infrastructural investment. Let's take, for example, to get goods and services to go across Africa, it takes 1 year for those goods to travel. How can we narrow those means? Is to infrastructural investment, and that is in transportation. So how can we meet those guidelines? We have to establish University of Technology that continue to look for new demographic changes, and that any investment infrastructure must have a backup industry that are with knowledge, technology to be able to assist the continued growth of the development. And that is the key powerful tools that Africa must enumerate. Now, let's look at when you leave, let's say when you leave Senegal and you travel there, you have the whole places, there is no network. But the growth is astronomically better. But when you look at Cameroon, for you, many of you who happen to be from Cameroon, you can imagine someone, Paul Biya, in power since 1982. He's barely understand even the name of the wife, who is his present wife. He barely understands, but yet he is the president of a sovereign country. It is deeply deplorable. It's deeply deplorable having someone with mentally deranged become the president of a country. You know, it's difficult. So, and that is why it is vital that we need a new vision for the 21st century leaders of Africa. And it should begin now. It should begin now. And that must be instituted for the good of Africa as a whole. Now, there's one little thing that I want to talk about. Is that of the Southern Cameroon questions. The Southern Cameroon questions. Southern Cameroon, I think I posted it in the note on my Facebook, and there was response onto the issues of Southern Cameroon. And the question I asked is, why should Southern Cameroon become a province in a foreign country, La Republique du Cameroun? And many people are confused why I asked such a question. Why is Southern Cameroon a province in a foreign country, Cameroon? Of course, many diplomats acknowledge the truth that the Southern Cameroon people, with 8 millions, at least we have almost 4,000 at the border of the United States seeking for a refuge, for asylum, whereas they have their own territory, they have their own country, and that they become a slave in their own country because we want to please France. And this is particularly damaging, that the world understood that. And this is the problem, that it continue accelerate in West Africa. And they look upon how things are being resolved when it comes to Africa are poorly. Southern Cameroon is a country that should have got their independence. It's the first democratic institution in West Africa. Southern Cameroon was the first elected prime minister in West Africa to transfer power from an elected government to the next elected officials in West Africa. But yet, they are still struggling to gain independence. The British ambassador in Cameroon wrote a letter at the time wrote a letter to the Minister of External Relations in La Republique du Cameroun at the time in 1961. There was no an effective government in La Republique. And as of now, there has not been any democratically elected government of La Republique du Cameroun. But yet, the British government wrote, despite they have its own government, they have own elected government of the people of Southern Cameroon at the time. Instead, they wrote to External Relations Minister of La Republique du Cameroon about something pertaining to the people of Southern Cameroon. And you see, this is what is making Africans very disturbed by the injustice. Why should a British ambassador wrote a letter pertaining to the people of Southern Cameroon to an unelected government of La Republique du Cameroon in 1961, I'm sorry. It does show how, and that is why we are bringing these out. So for all of us to make critical analysis and vision, why should the people of Southern Cameroon remain a glue control? I give a clear example. Luxembourg. Luxembourg is a country in Europe. They have only 600 inhabitants. 600. Not even up to 1 million, Luxembourg. But they are a sovereign nation. In Southern Cameroon, it's 8 million people that were fully deprived of their right as a sovereign nation. They were deprived. Vis-a-vis, it says, the colonial territory be given their rightful independence. The people of Southern Cameroon were deprived this privilege, this fundamental policy for self-determination and merged into La Republique. I wrote the British government. I have their response here, but because of confidential reason, I don't want to broadcast here because that's an understanding between me and the British government. But however, I am very deplorable about their policy. You know, when you look at the context in which they wrote, they look at us, Africa, as a dormant. They carefully choose their choice of word. When it comes to writing, the people of Southern Cameroon shouldn't be a province in a foreign country, despite the fact that they are the first democratically elected government. And initially begin with Ndele, second by Jongu Foncha, and third by Jua. In fact, the first democratically elected government in West Africa, in La Republique du Cameroon, and up to the present moment, they have not demonstrated critically elected government and the peaceful transfer of power. And you understand who influenced whatever goes in La Republique du Cameroon is France. Because France has glued onto, and that is why they are losing very badly on most of the West African countries, because they have found that France has not been any good faith when it comes to Africa as a whole. Of course, they understand that Africans are stupid, but unfortunately, West Africa, and I love the CNN critical analysis, the CNN broadcast that things when it comes to West Africa is least likely get anywhere to be found within the European context. And that is why this is vital, and that African must understood that development is vital, and that leaving the Europeans and reignite a change of culture. Cultural development, Africa is vital because we understand how Euro developed. How can we change the cultural dynamic? How can we change the cultural dynamic in Africa is changing the reinvestment. First is the youth education system, the engineering. We train. I don't mean to offend pastors and religious officials, but in fact, we train more religious people more than we train the engineering. And that should be, there are certain churches that shouldn't be existent in Africa. We need to train engineering. We need to put vital infrastructure in place for the development of engineering. That's the key. And we need to support the education system. We need to look at the young generation that has vision, their goal, and their objectives will be part of the development. And that should be the key objective that Africa must envisage. Imagine children. I like the way this critical thinker put it in words. The children are like a blank slate. The children are like a blank slate, and that they are ready. They are ready. And so we need to recognize their upbringing and put infrastructure in place that meet the dispensation of this young generation. And so African leaders must have this focus in mind. It is imperative, it is crucial, and for the future of Africa. Let's look at China in particular. I mean, they said China just developed out of a sudden. It's because somebody, somewhere, has a sound policy. Asia is fast growing, but we spend so much time about church. I don't mean to offend pastors that are watching, but it is vital that we must understand that investment technology must be the key factor for African visionary, and that funding, and that's why that goes back to the IMF. That is why they never allocate resources that provide an opportunity because of the high drastic interest rate. And so this country, Zimbabwe, that just instituted money backed by gold, is the key. Instead of waiting for IMF, which is a French-controlled banking system that care less about Africa. So we need to institute mechanism. Instead of just roaming behind France, we need a mechanism that works for the Africa as a whole. And we need to relinquish corruption system. We need to relinquish corruption system. But we need vital leaders that have vision for the common growth. And we need to break the bond with the IMF. Let's take, for example,
Okay, Chacha Falvin.
hey, how are you?
How are you? Fine?
How are you, bro?
I am good.
Oh, nice.
Good.
Where are you from?
Where are you from?
I'm speaking here in the United States. I'm from Southern Cameroon initially.
Oh, I from Pakistan. I from Pakistan.
All right.
Bayan kis jagah lo pucha di level.
Yeah, excuse me. I use
Salu maafी देना गलती होगी चाचा अल्लाह ने भी नवाज